The hidden bank book I found in your grandpa's drawer didn't list memories, it listed dates, deposits, and the one person he loved most. I'm telling you this now because grief has a way of turning a house into a museum, and every drawer becomes a question you're afraid to ask. 3 days after the funeral, when the casseroles were gone and the sympathy cards stopped arriving, the silence got loud. I went into our bedroom, his side still made up the way I couldn't bring myself to change it. I wasn't looking for secrets. I was looking for socks. For the little things that prove a person really lived here. My fingers slid along the bottom drawer, under the folded undershirts and the handkerchiefs he insisted on ironing. That's when I felt it, paper where paper shouldn't be. Thin. Stubborn. Hidden. Behind the drawer liner, taped flat like someone didn't want it to breathe, was a small bank passbook. The kind they used to stamp with ink so fresh it looked wet. Worn corners. Gray cover. His initials in tidy pen. The house was so quiet I could hear the old clock in the hallway counting seconds like it was counting mistakes. I opened the passbook and smelled that old paper scent, dust and metal and time. My thumb smudged a stamped date, and I felt my stomach drop like I'd missed a step in the dark. Because I knew our accounts. I knew every penny we stretched. I knew every check we worried over. And I had never seen this book before. So let me make you a promise before we go any farther. If you stay with me to the end, you'll know exactly what that bank book proved, and why the person it was meant for shocked every one of us. And you'll understand what loved most really means, because it isn't always the same as loved best. The first page showed the bank's name and a branch address across town. Not the one we used. A different one, older, quieter, the kind with a bell on the door. The account had been opened 32 years earlier. 32 years, and I shared a kitchen table with that man every day. Do you hear me? Every day. My breath came out shaky. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the book rest in my palms like it had weight beyond paper. What would you assume, if you found a secret bank account after a death? Gambling? A second family? A plan to leave? I told myself not to panic. I told myself there must be some simple explanation, some old habit, some work account, some forgotten savings. Then I turned the page, and the pattern began. Stamped entries, neat as prayer, deposits every month. Not huge at first, $50, $75, $100. Then later, more. And between them, withdrawals that didn't match our bills, our holidays, our life. What caught me wasn't the money. It was the dates. He didn't deposit on the first of the month like everyone else. He deposited on the same day, over and over, like he was keeping an appointment. And suddenly, I wasn't holding a bank book anymore. I was holding a diary written in numbers. I started at the beginning, because that's what grandmothers do. We go back to the first stitch to understand the tear. The account opened in late spring. I remember that spring. We were still young enough to believe love could fix anything, and old enough to know money could break it. Back then, your grandpa, Harold, worked double shifts at the plant. He came home with his hands smelling like oil and metal, and he'd wash them at the sink like he was trying to scrub off the day. We weren't rich. We were careful. Careful groceries. Careful shoes. Careful heat in the winter. So how did a man like that quietly feed another account for decades? And why did he hide it from me? Now, let me tell you the family story we all believed. Harold was steady. Not flashy. He fixed things instead of talking about feelings. If a door squeaked, he oiled it. If a child cried, he found a way to solve the problem, often without asking what the crying meant. To the kids, he was dependable. To me, he was a man of routines. Coffee at 6:10. Newspaper folded into quarters. Shoes lined up like soldiers. And to our family, love looked like providing. That's why, after he died, everyone assumed the same thing. Whatever he left behind would reflect the same old order: spouse first, children next, grandkids after, equal and clean. But families are never clean. They're just good at hiding the stains. Even before the funeral flowers wilted, the old resentment started whispering. Elaine, our daughter, kept asking about the house paperwork. Just so we know what's what, she said, like questions don't have sharp edges. Daniel, our oldest, got quiet in that tight way he does when he's angry but trying to look reasonable. He kept counting costs in his head, what the hospice took, what the burial cost, what should be left. And Peter, my youngest, tried to make jokes to keep the air soft, but even he stared too long at Harold's empty chair. I'd seen it before, in other families, the moment grief turns into inventory. And in the middle of all that, here I was with a secret passbook in my hands, stamped like a confession. I thought about the little things that never made sense. The quick errands, on Saturday mornings when he'd shave twice like he wanted to look especially neat. The private phone calls he'd take on the porch, turning his body away from the window like the angle could hide his voice. The missing cash, just small amounts, when I'd balance the envelope in the kitchen drawer and come up short, and he'd say, "Must have miscounted." Did I miscount, or did I trust too much? I turned another page, and my throat tightened. Because the withdrawals, those odd, deliberate withdrawals, kept landing on dates that meant something. A birthday. An anniversary. A winter month when someone might need heat. Who was he keeping warm? So I did something I'm not proud of, and something I think I earned the right to do after 51 years of marriage. I became a detective in my own life. I carried that passbook to the kitchen table, the same table where Harold used to peel oranges in one long ribbon, careful not to break it. I wrote the dates down on a yellow legal pad. I lined them up. I stared until the numbers started acting like words. Here's what I saw. Deposits, regular, patient, almost tender. Withdrawals, timed, purposeful, sometimes bigger right before a holiday, sometimes right after a hospital visit I remembered too well. And then I hit a date that made my pen stop. December 14th. That was the day, years ago, Harold insisted on driving into town, even though the roads were iced and the wind was mean enough to slap you through a coat. He came home late, boots wet, eyelashes dotted with melted snow, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. That night he sat at the edge of the bed and rubbed his hands together like he couldn't get warm. I asked, "Everything all right?" And he said, "Yeah. Just tired." In the passbook, next to that date, was a withdrawal, $600. $600 might not sound like much to some folks, but to us back then, it was the difference between steady and scared. Where did it go? I flipped forward. Another withdrawal on May 3rd, $1, $200. May 3rd was the day Harold missed Daniel's high school award ceremony. Remember that? Daniel never forgot it, not really. He smiled on stage, but his eyes kept searching the seats. Harold told us the plant had an emergency. He said he was sorry. He looked sorry. But the passbook stamped the truth. He pulled out $1,200 that morning. What emergency costs exactly $1,200 in cash, and requires you to miss your son's moment? I didn't sleep that night. I kept the passbook under my pillow like I was afraid it would crawl away. And then I noticed something else. A name. Not a full name, just a fragment, written in the teller's neat handwriting beside a transfer note on one of the later pages, N. Avery. My heart gave a hard, ugly thump. Because I didn't know any N. Avery. Did you ever realize how terrifying a single initial can be? A secret doesn't shout. It adds up. The next morning, I did what I always do when I'm scared, I cleaned. I scrubbed the counters. I folded towels. I reorganized a drawer that didn't need reorganizing. But my mind kept circling that initial. N. And a last name that felt like a door I'd never tried to open. I went to Harold's coat closet, the one closet nobody touches because it still smells like his aftershave and cold air. In the pocket of his Sunday coat, my fingers found a folded receipt, creased so many times it had turned soft. A money order stub. Payable to Nora Avery. There it was. Not an initial anymore. A person. And suddenly the house felt too small for the truth that was coming. Who was Nora Avery? And why had my husband been paying her, quietly, faithfully, for decades? I'll tell you what I did next, and you can judge me if you want. I drove to the bank. I brought the passbook like it might explain itself if I held it up to the light. The branch was older than the one we used. Brass handles. A bulletin board with faded community flyers. The kind of place where time moves slowly on purpose. At the counter, a young teller looked at me the way young people look at old paper, like it belongs in a museum. She turned it over, typed, frowned politely. Then she said, "Ma'am, I'm going to ask my manager." I sat in a chair by a fake plant and listened to the air conditioner kick on and off like it was trying to make up its mind. When the manager came out, she wasn't young. That mattered. Her eyes went straight to Harold's name and softened. "Harold Bennett," she said, almost under her breath. "I remember him." My mouth went dry. "You do?" She nodded. "He came in every month. Always on the same day. Always asked for the same form. Always very careful. Careful. That word again. Harold's favorite way of loving." I asked her the question that felt like swallowing glass. "Who is Nora Avery?" The manager's face changed, not guilty, not shocked, just sad, like she'd been waiting years for someone to ask the right thing. "I can't give you personal information," she said gently. "But I can tell you this account had a beneficiary listed." My fingers tightened around my purse strap. "Who?" She paused. "The beneficiary is not your children." I felt my vision narrow. "Then who is it?" She slid a small card across the counter, not a statement, just a printed note with a box number and a name. Nora Avery. And beneath it, in smaller print, "Pay on death." The room didn't spin. I did. In my head. Back through every year, every dinner, every Christmas morning photo where Harold stood behind us, hands on our shoulders, smiling like a man with nothing to hide. What was he hiding from me, and why? The manager leaned closer and lowered her voice. "There's also a safe deposit box tied to this account. If you're the spouse, you may be entitled to access with the right documents." A safe deposit box. Do you understand what that means? There was more. There was always more. Back home, I didn't tell the kids. Not yet. I sat at Harold's desk and opened the passbook again, slower this time, like I was reading a will written in invisible ink. Near the end were 2 entries that made my chest ache. A withdrawal on October 9th, $2,000. October 9th was the day Harold took me to my specialist appointment and held my purse the whole time like it was his job. The day I was frightened, and he kept saying, "We'll handle it." That same afternoon, he withdrew $2,000. So while he was promising me, "We'll handle it," he was handling something else too. And then the last stamped line, just weeks before he died. A deposit labeled "Final." $18,450. Final. I stared at that word until it stopped looking like English. Final for who? Final for what? Had he been planning his goodbye in silence while I was still buying his favorite cereal? My hand went to the back cover of the passbook, and that's when I felt it, something tucked into the seam. A thin piece of paper, folded small. A letter. It was addressed in Harold's handwriting. To me. Just 2 words. "Martha, please." My name in his hand made my eyes burn. I sat down hard, the chair scraping the floor loud enough to sound like anger. I unfolded the letter and began to read. He wrote, "Martha, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. And you have found what I couldn't bring myself to say out loud." I stopped. Swallowed. Kept going. He wrote about a time before me, before our first date, before our first fight, before our first child. A time when he was 19 and scared and trying to be a good man with no idea how. He wrote about a girl named Helen. He wrote about a baby. A baby girl. He wrote, "Her name is Nora." My heart lurched, and for a moment I couldn't feel my hands. He said Helen died when Nora was still young. Nora was placed with relatives. Then later, after a move, after paperwork, after silence, she vanished from his life like a page torn out. Harold wrote, "I looked for her for years, and when I finally found her again, she was grown, and she didn't want me in her life as a father. She wanted nothing from me but one thing, help, when it was needed. Quiet help." I read that line twice. Quiet help. He wrote, "I did not tell you because I was ashamed. Not of Nora. Of myself. I thought if I said it out loud, I would lose you. And I thought I deserved that." I pressed the letter to my mouth, like I could stop the ache from escaping. Then came the line that broke me clean in two. "I loved you with my whole life. But I owed Nora the part of me I lost." Sometimes love looks like a debt you choose to pay. He explained the passbook. The monthly deposits were the promise he made once he found her again. Help with rent during hard months, help with medical bills when she got sick, help with her daughter's school fees when Nora couldn't catch her breath financially. Her daughter. A granddaughter Harold never held. A child who existed outside every family photo on our mantle. Harold wrote, "I put the final balance aside for Lily. She's smart. She's kind. She deserves a start that isn't heavy with my mistakes. Please don't punish her for what I didn't have the courage to say. Lily. Not one of our grandkids. A name none of us had ever spoken at our table." I sat there until the light shifted in the window, until my tea went cold untouched, until the house felt like it was holding its breath with me. How do you grieve a man, and meet a stranger in the same moment? I wish I could tell you I handled it calmly. I didn't. That evening, I called the kids over. Not for dinner, no one could have eaten. Just, over. They came in with tired faces, expecting paperwork. Expecting decisions. Expecting me to be the steady one. I set the passbook on the coffee table like a piece of evidence. Elaine leaned forward first. "What is that?" I said, "Something your father hid." Daniel's jaw tightened. Peter's eyebrows lifted like he wanted to laugh it off and couldn't. I opened to the page with the final deposit and slid the book toward them. "Read the dates," I told them. And while they stared, I watched their faces change, confusion first, then suspicion, then that familiar family anger looking for a place to land. Daniel looked up sharp. Is this another account?" "Yes." "How much is in it?" Elaine asked, voice too controlled. I swallowed. "Enough to start a fight." Peter flipped pages fast, like speed could make the truth less real. "Who's Nora Avery?" I took out the letter. My hands shook so badly the paper crackled like dry leaves. "I'm going to read this," I said. "And I need you to listen without interrupting, because once I start, we can't go back. Do you know how terrifying it is to be the one holding the match in a room full of old gas?" I read Harold's words out loud. When I said, "Nora is his daughter," Elaine made a sound, half breath, half disbelief. Daniel stood up so fast the recliner rocked behind him. No. No, that's not. He wouldn't. Peter whispered, "Before Mom?" I nodded. "Before me." Elaine's face went pale. "So he's been sending her money instead of, what, us?" I felt heat rise in my chest. "Not instead of. In addition to." Daniel pointed at the passbook like it had insulted him. "He missed my ceremony for this." "Maybe," I said softly. "Maybe he did." And then the room broke into pieces. Voices rose. Words hit walls. The air turned sharp. Elaine said, "Betrayal," like it tasted bitter. Daniel said, "Liar," like he'd been waiting years to say it. Peter said nothing at first, just kept turning pages, slower now, like he was finally seeing the pattern. I heard myself say, louder than I meant to, "Stop." They froze. 3 grown children suddenly small in my living room, staring at their mother like I might have an answer that doesn't hurt. I held up the letter. He asked me not to punish Lily, I said. A child none of us knew existed. Daniel's voice cracked. Why should we care about Lily? And that's when Peter finally spoke. Because Dad cared, he said. Enough to plan his death around her. Silence fell so hard it felt like snow piling on a roof. Elaine turned her face away. I watched her blink fast, fighting tears like they were weakness. Daniel paced, hands in his hair. So what now? We just hand it over? I asked the question that had been hunting me all day. What would you do if you found out your father spent 30 years trying to fix one mistake? No one answered. Because there isn't a clean answer. Here's the truth that settled in me like a stone. Harold didn't hide this because he loved us less. He hid it because he knew we'd measure love like a pie, slice it, count it, argue over who deserved the biggest piece. And Harold loved like a man carrying a bucket through a burning house. He ran toward what needed him most, not toward what was fairest. Is that noble? Is that wrong? That night, Elaine went into the kitchen and cried quietly into a dish towel so no one would hear her. The same way I used to when the kids were small and money was tight and Harold worked late. Daniel drove off for an hour and came back with red eyes, like he'd been yelling inside the car where no one could argue back. Peter stayed and helped me pick up the letter when it slipped from my hands. He looked at me and said, "Mom, did you know?" "No," I whispered. "But I think part of me always knew there was something. I just didn't know what shape it had." Then Peter asked the question that hurt the most. Did he love her more? I stared at Harold's empty chair. And I said the only honest thing I could. I don't know if he loved her more. But I know he carried her more. He didn't choose favorites. He chose the heaviest burden. 2 days later, I called the number on the money order stub. My finger hovered over the last digit like it might bite me. A woman answered, her voice careful, like someone who's learned not to expect kindness. "Hello?" I said, "My name is Martha Bennett." Silence. Then, very quietly, "He's gone." It wasn't a question. It was a fact she'd been bracing for. "Yes," I said. "He died last week." Her breath caught. Not a sob, just a small sound, like a thread snapping. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She said, "He kept his promise." And I realized, in that moment, that Harold had been 2 men in one body for decades, my husband, and someone else's missing father. We arranged to meet at a diner halfway between our towns. Neutral ground. Coffee and linoleum and a jukebox that didn't work. When I walked in, I knew her immediately. Not because she looked like Harold, though she did, around the eyes. Because she held her hands the same way he did when he was nervous, fingers laced tight, thumbs rubbing together like prayer without words. She stood halfway, unsure if she was allowed to take up space. I said, "Nora?" She nodded. "Martha." We sat. And for a full minute, neither of us touched our coffee. "What do you say to the living proof of the story you were never told?" Finally, she said, "I didn't want to ruin his life." I swallowed hard. I didn't know there was anything to ruin. She looked down. "He told me you were good. That you were the kind of woman he didn't deserve to lie to." That sentence landed on me like both a compliment and an apology. She slid an envelope across the table. "I found this after he stopped answering," she said. "It came in the mail. He must have scheduled it." I opened it carefully. Inside was a photocopy of the beneficiary form, and a short note in Harold's handwriting. "Tell Lily I'm proud of her." My throat tightened. "Where is Lily?" Nora hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed me a picture. A girl with a wide smile and a chipped front tooth, holding a science fair ribbon like it was treasure. I felt tears rise, fast and hot. Not jealousy. Grief, because Harold never got to see that smile in person. Nora watched me carefully. Are you here to fight me? I looked at her hands, hands that had probably held her own loneliness for years. And I said, no. I'm here to understand what I married. She nodded slowly, like that was the most respectful answer she could have hoped for. Then she said something I didn't expect. He didn't buy me gifts. He didn't show up at holidays. He didn't ask to be called Dad. He just made sure the lights stayed on. The lights stayed on. That was Harold's love in a sentence. When I drove home, I kept thinking about that word everyone throws around when money is involved, fairness. Fair is dividing a cake into equal slices. But love isn't cake. Love is triage. Love is showing up where the bleeding won't stop. Does that make it hurt less? No. Because here is the part one won't sugarcoat. He should have told me. He should have trusted me with the truth instead of making me meet it alone after he was gone. There were nights I lay awake, furious, staring at the ceiling, hearing his, "I'm just tired," in my head like a lie that had aged into rust. And there were mornings I'd catch myself reaching for his coffee mug, then remember there would be no more explanations. Only choices. So I gathered the kids again. Not for another argument, this time, for a decision. Daniel came in guarded. Elaine's eyes were puffy but dry. Peter sat close to me like he was bracing for impact. I told them about meeting Nora. I told them about Lily. Elaine's voice was small. Does she know about us? No, I said. She knows Harold as a man who helped. Not as a grandfather in a photo. Daniel clenched his jaw. And the money? I took a breath. The money is legally set to go to Nora, I said. But the letter makes it clear it's meant for Lily. Peter asked, "What do you want to do, Mom?" I looked at Harold's picture on the mantel, the one where he's holding a fishing pole, smiling like the world is simple. And I said, I want to finish what he started, the honest way. Elaine frowned. Meaning? Meaning we don't fight a dead man's pen, I said. We honor it. And we stop pretending love is only real when it's convenient. Daniel's eyes flashed. So we just accept being lied to? I shook my head. No. We accept the truth. And we keep our dignity while we do it. Then I asked Daniel a question only a mother can ask without permission. Would you want your worst mistake to be the only thing people remember? He didn't answer right away. He stared at the carpet like the fibers might spell out a response. Finally he said, rough, no. Elaine whispered, I'm still mad. I am too, I said. Mad and sad can live in the same house. So we made a plan. Not perfect. Not painless. We agreed the Passbook funds would be transferred as Harold intended, set into a protected education account for Lily. Something steady. Something that couldn't be snatched away in a moment of anger. And we agreed on one more thing, something that felt harder than money. We agreed to let Nora and Lily know who Harold was to us. Not to claim them. Not to rewrite their story. Just to tell the truth, gently, and offer a door instead of a wall. A week later, Nora came to the house. She stood in the doorway like a guest who wasn't sure she'd been invited. Elaine brought out lemonade with hands that trembled just a little. Daniel stayed quiet but present. Peter tried to make small talk and failed. Then Lily walked in behind Nora, shy, curious, eyes taking in the family photos like they were a puzzle. She paused at the mantel and pointed. That's him, she said. Her voice wasn't dramatic. Just certain. That's Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett. Not Grandpa. Not Dad. Just the name of a man who'd kept her world from tipping too far. I crouched slightly so I could look her in the eyes. Lily, I said, I'm Martha. She nodded politely, like she'd been taught manners by someone who worked hard for them. I said, he was my husband. Her eyebrows lifted. She looked back at Nora, confused. Nora swallowed. Lily, he was also part of our story before you were born. Lily's face tightened, not with anger, more like she'd just discovered the world is bigger than she thought. And then she asked the question that made my throat close. Did he love me? The room went still. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to hush. I could have lied. I could have said something sweet and simple. Instead, I told her the truest thing I know. He loved you enough to plan for you quietly, I said. And he loved you enough not to make you responsible for his guilt. Lily looked down, twisting her sleeve. Then she said, I wish I met him. Peter cleared his throat and said, me too. And just like that, something in the room loosened, like a knot finally admitting it was tired of being tight. Later that night, when everyone left and the house went quiet again, I took the passbook out one last time. I ran my thumb over the stamped word final. And I realized something that took me too long to learn. A final balance isn't just money. It's a measure of what someone tried to set right before they ran out of time. Harold loved us, his wife, his children, his grandkids, the way he always had, with work, with repairs, with groceries, with presents, with routine. But the passbook showed another kind of love too. The kind that doesn't get applause. The kind that doesn't sit at your holiday table. The kind that keeps a light on in a house you've never seen. So if you came here for a simple answer, who did he love most? Here's mine. He loved the person who needed him in secret, because he couldn't forgive himself otherwise. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the greatest love isn't the loudest one. Sometimes it's the one that costs the most to carry. Love leaves clues, even when people don't. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of the hidden corners families keep, please tap like. It helps this channel, Dust of Old Days, reach the folks who need these stories. And if you want more grandmother-style, slow-burn family tales, hidden objects, old papers, and emotional revelations, subscribe to Dust of Old Days. There are more drawers to open, and more truths worth telling. For now, I put the passbook back, not as evidence, but as a reminder. We rarely know the full weight of the people we love, until we're the ones left holding it.